Chapter 11. The moment Kath stepped through the garden arbor onto the sweeping green lawn of Hardcastle, she was searching for him. She couldn't help it, try as she might. Her eyes skimmed over the guests, hunting for a three-pointed jester's hat amid the bonnets and wide-brimmed sun hats. Her entire body was batting its breath, waiting for the moment she would see him, should he even be present. Did jokers attend garden parties? She didn't know. She felt like an idiot, curtsying to the lords and barons, ladies and countesses, all the while letting her attention scurry off to each new arrival, each glimpse of black amid the colorful clothing of the nobility. She knew she should be looking for the king. Her mother had been adamant that Catherine make herself known to the king immediately upon arrival. She was to give him the delicate rose-flavored macarons that were tucked into her skirt pocket, and she was not to leave his side until either the party was over or she had a gem on her finger. To Kath's relief, as she made one complete turn around the lawn, the king was nowhere in sight. To her disappointment, neither was Jest. Stupid dreams, stupid fantasies, stupid lemon tree and white roses, and what if he didn't come at all? It felt like it would be a wasted outing in her previous day dress. She hadn't realized until that moment that she'd chosen it specifically for him. "My dear Catherine, how appropriately attired you are today." She swerved around to see Margaret Merle gambling across the grass, clutching two battledore rackets in her hands. She was dressed all in sunflower yellow, and on her head was a fascinator that looked like an enormous yellow rosebud waiting to bloom. Catherine cocked her head. There was something different about Margaret today, something difficult to place. If Kath hadn't known better, she would have thought that today, in that hat, in this light, Margaret looked almost, well, not pretty, but unoffensive to the eyes at least. Perhaps she was seeing her in a new light, knowing how fond the Duke was of her. "Good day, Lady Margaret," she said, curtsying. "Good enough, one supposes," said Margaret. "Though unwarranted optimism is unwise for one who wishes to eschew disappointment. Nevertheless, I do hope it shall be a better day than the ball at the least. Have you heard of my trauma?" She clutched the rackets against her chest. "Oh yes, I heard all about the Jabberwock attack. I can only imagine how horrifying it was. I'm so glad to see you unharmed." Catherine, upon saying it, realized that it was true, but Margaret only huffed. Yes, quite horrifying. But before that, have you heard tell what your awful cat did?" "My cat? You mean Cheshire? I wouldn't call him mine precisely." "Nevertheless, he is a nuisance that should not be suffered among civilized society. I hope you left him at home today." Catherine cocked her head, feigning ignorance. "What has he done?" "Oh dear, I find it difficult to believe that word has not yet reached your ear." "It was dreadful. The mongrel appeared from nowhere, in that uncanny way he does, and plopped right down on my head." She shuddered. "I'm sure Cheshire meant no harm. I actually think he's rather fond of you," Margaret pouted. "I hope not. My one solace is that everyone was distracted by the Jabberwock, and that has overshadowed my torment. My mortification." "Yes, we can hope." Catherine wrung her wrist and buried a remark about the poor diamond courtiers. "Is it true, do you know, that the king also made mention of a bride at the ball?" He was about to propose before all turned chaotic. "You did miss much that night, Lady Catherine." "My loss, to be sure. And has there been much speculation as to who it might be?" "I wouldn't know. I'm not one to gossip. Gossiping always leads to spoiled milk." "Of course, that's a very good rule to live by." Kath was nodding sagely when she spotted Lord Warthog taking a turn around the lawn with the Dowager Countess 1, 2, 3. The Countess had her hand on the Duke's elbow, the other gripping a cane that kept sinking into the soft grass. She was speaking fervently on some topic, but the Duke's gaze was darting from Catherine to Margaret to the ground and back to Margaret. His jowled face was warped with anxiety. Clearing her throat, Catherine leaned closer to Margaret, like a conspirator. "Tell me more about the Jabberwock attack," she whispered. "Were you very frightened?" "Oh, must we speak of it?" Margaret placed a hand to her brow. "I feel faint at the memory. Did you know that the beast broke through the windows and headed straight for me? I cannot be sure why. One is made to wonder if a creature with such wicked propensities might not be naturally drawn to one of goodness and pristine moral values, such as myself." Yes," said Catherine. "One is made to wonder." "Indeed, and the nightmare shall haunt me unto my deathbed. Even now I see its jaws when I shut my eyes, still hear the click-clacking of its enormous claws." Catherine gripped her elbow for support. "Yes, but you were rescued, were you not? I heard the Duke was very heroic. Is it true that he threw himself in between you and the beast?" Margaret sniffed. "More like he couldn't get out of the way fast enough. That man has all the grace of a wild boar." She squinted. "Actually, I think wild boars can be quite quick and athletic." "Oh, there he is. Wave quickly, or he'll think we've been talking about him." With a look that was as much grimace as a smile, Margaret wiggled her fingers at the Duke and the Countess. The Duke immediately looked away, ducking his large chin behind a green cravat. Margaret grunted. "Such arrogance. I'm beginning to think he might just be shy. We mustn't encourage such ill behavior, Catherine. That is just like paying the cart in carrots before the horse gets his gift." Kath tried to puzzle this out for a moment, but quickly gave up. "How I do wish I could find fault with your wisdom, Margaret." Margaret scoffed. "Why, I dare say the Countess is flirting with him. What a vile woman." "I'm not sure. I could grab onto any man's arm too if I wanted to pretend to have a crooked spine." To be fair, she does have a crooked spine. "Yes, and evidently a desire to add to her wealth. Can you imagine curtsying to her ladyship, the Dutch Countess 1, 2, 3? Or the Counting Duchess of Tuscany? Who needs that many syllables anyway? It seems to me that he's just helping an old lady across the lawn." Margaret glowered. "You're observant as a toadstool, Lady Pinkerton." Kath scrambled to right the teetering ship of their conversation. "Well, even if the Countess were flirting, I think the Duke is actually taken with—" "Oh no, now they're coming this way." Margaret turned her back on them. "Let's look as though we're caught in a game of battledore and shuttlecock, so they won't pester us." Margaret thrust the extra racket into Catherine's hand. "Won't that be rude?" Ignoring her, Margaret hustled a fair distance away and threw up the shuttlecock, a needle-nosed hummingbird, striking it in Catherine's direction. Instinctively, Kath dove to hit it back, but missed. The hummingbird stuck nose first into the sod. "Sorry, dearest Catherine," Margaret preened loud enough to be heard halfway across the lawn. "You really must take more time to practice." Stooping, Catherine pried the bird out of the grass. Its jittery wings buzzed. She glanced up at Margaret, who was adamantly not looking at the Duke, while the Duke, standing not far away, had eyes only for her, now that he was in no danger of being found out. The Countess continued to prattle on beside him, oblivious to his wandering attention. "Come on, Catherine," Margaret urged. "Hit it back." Sighing, Kath tossed the bird into the air and batted it toward Margaret. They made it through 3 passes, Margaret growing more competitive with every hit. Though Catherine would never have considered herself athletic, she was in better shape than her competitor, who was soon wheezing with the effort, her face blotchy and scrunched in concentration. But her lack of skill was made up for in determination, and on her third hit, she sent the bird flying over Catherine's head. Kath ducked and swerved to follow its path through the sky, straight toward an enormous jet-black raven. Catherine gasped. The hummingbird froze mid-flight and backed up fast on its fluttering wings. It hesitated a moment, not knowing what else to do, then turned and flew off toward the hedge maze. Catherine did not care. Her heart was in her throat, her eyes scouring the crowd. Dresses and waistcoats, top hats and bonnets. She spotted him amid the tables where the ladies were fanning themselves and sipping at their tea and beaming at the joker as he strummed a mandolin. Above them, the raven cawed and just glanced up, still strumming. The raven soared down and settled on his shoulder. He hardly seemed to notice at first. Then, as Catherine stared as openly as a child at her first parade, Jess glanced toward her. His eyes connected with hers in an instant, as if he'd known just where she was, as if he'd been watching her for some while and waiting for her to notice. Even from so far a distance, she thought she detected a faint smile shot her way. All sensation left her body. No more soft grass beneath her feet. No more racket clutched between her hands. No more hair clinging to the back of her damp neck. The moment answered one question at least. She felt as drawn to him as ever, though whether it was mere attraction or some other, stronger force, she had no way of knowing, and no previous experience to draw from. Jess looked away. The connection snapped, and Catherine dragged in a long breath, grateful to be rescued from her own lack of subtlety. The look had been just long enough to fan the flames of her curiosity, and short enough to put none of them out. His audience was growing fast. Even some of the spade gardeners had stopped working to listen to the Joker's music. Catherine realized with a jolt that her mother was among them, beaming as large as anyone. The song ended, the notes reaching Catherine over the expanse of lawn, followed by the delighted cooing and clapping of the crowd. Jess tucked the mandolin against his side and bowed. The raven took flight again, soaring off in the direction of the herb garden. "Catherine, you look like a buffon. What are you staring at?" Oh, she faced Margaret again, clawing her fingernails into the racket's netting. "I was distracted by the raven. Did you see it? It appears that the Joker is over. Oh my, Margaret, what is happening to your hat?" Margaret's face lit up, and she reached tentative fingers toward her fascinator. "What is it doing? Tell me." "It's blooming," said Kath. As the rosebud that was as big as Margaret's head began to open, the yellow petals curling upon to reveal a lush flower, the hue deepening to rich gold as its center. The edges of the petals glimmered, as if dipped in sugar crystals, and the softest, most wonderful fragrance drifted toward Kath's nose. "My, that is a fine hat you're wearing, Lady Margaret." They spun to see the Countess, who had spoken, and the Duke, who was blushing at his hooves, standing not far away. Margaret's enthusiasm fizzled as she stuck her nose into the air. "Thank you," she said, rather unkindly. "Did you by chance get it at that new hat shop outside the crossroads?" the Countess asked. "I've heard much about it these past weeks and have been meaning to make a trip there myself. Though with my old age, it's hard to get around much unless I have a strapping young man to assist me." She grinned, as if she'd said something wicked, and curled her fingers into the crook of the Duke's elbow. "That is indeed where I got it. The confession seemed strained. Margaret's shoulders stiffened beside her ear. That is to say, naturally, that pride and the sin of arrogance, it requires willpower to duff the vanity that such attention-grabbingness might otherwise prevail upon oneself, she gulped. Amen. Amen, Kath, the Duke, and the Countess recited. Kath cleared her throat. I believe what Lady Margaret means to say is that once a goldfish, forever a goldfish. The Duke dared to glance up, his small dark eyes captivated by Margaret and her unfurled hat. Despite her haughtiness and upturned nose, with Lord Warthog ogling her in such a way, and her hat sitting aromatically atop her head, it once again became possible to imagine her as not unattractive. Forever a goldfish, breathed the Duke. I could not agree more. It's nice to see young ladies taking up their exercise, said the Countess, gesturing her cane toward the battledore rackets. I was just telling the Duke that this tea party is already much improved over the black and white ball. I should like to see the King maintain such high standards of guests. None of that riffraff that was about before. Oh yes, Margaret said, like that awful Cheshire cat. What is a feline like that doing at a royal ball, with all that vanishing and unvanishing, and sitting on people's heads? It isn't natural. Such is an insult to proper ladies and gentlemen. The Countess planted her cane back into the grass. Not to mention Mr. and Mrs. Peter. She made a face akin to a child trying their first bite of cooked spinach. Dreadful folk. I'll be pleased to never cross their paths again. What we can be grateful for, interrupted Catherine, folding her hands over the battledore racket, is that you were present, Your Grace. Margaret was just telling me about your courageous sacrifice, throwing yourself in between her and the Jabberwock, in order to protect a fair maidens. And I see you still bear the wound to prove it. She gestured at the bandage peeking above the Duke's cravat, then held the racket against her chest. It's like something from a story. So romantic. Margaret, don't you think the Duke was very brave? She was met with a brooding glare from Margaret, and was glad the Duke was too busy blushing again to notice. A new voice intruded into their circle, deep and witty, and trembling with laughter. I certainly hope, said the Joker, that this won't be the standard of romance by which all men in the Kingdom of Hearts shall be held to. Catherine whipped her head so quickly to the side she near gave herself a neck crack. The Joker was tipping his bell-tinged hat to the Duke. You're on a difficult competition, Lord Duke. Well, I wouldn't, the Duke stammered, his snout twitching. That is to say, any man would have. Lady Muriel was in danger, and it wasn't anything spectacular, I assure you. He's humble too, said Jest, raising an eyebrow and looking at Catherine, Margaret, and the Countess in turn. Which of you three ladies is he trying so hard to impress? Biting the inside of her cheek, Catherine subtly nodded toward Margaret. Oh, if Jest questioned the Duke's choice, there was no sign of it as he rocked back on his heels. The Countess batted her lashes, flattered to have been included as a potential romantic conquest. All you young men these days fancy yourselves such charmers, she said, clearly charmed. But I assure you, I won't be marrying again. Once in a lifetime was plenty enough for me. A loss to us all, said Jest, sweeping up the Countess's hand and kissing the back of it. She swooned some more. You must be the ever-wise Lady Muriel I've heard so much about, he said, giving a kiss to Margaret, and then, and "The delightful Lady Pinkerton, if I'm not mistaken." His attention found her again. The leather of his glove was warm and supple beneath her fingertips, and the slight graze of his lips on her knuckle was hardly worthy of the heat that climbed up her neck and onto her ears. There was a joke behind his coal-lined eyes, a secret passing between the two of them. "Enchanted, Mr. Joker," said Kath, glad when her voice didn't shake. His grin brightened. Lord Varthog straightened his waistcoat and squared his shoulders with renewed composure. "And what you, Lady Merle? I don't recall I've yet heard of your having any, proposals." Kath flinched. Though she knew the Duke's intentions were anything but cruel, his sudden change of countenance made the hopeful question sound as though he were mocking her, which was, of course, precisely what Margaret heard. Glowering, she snatched the battledore racket out of Catherine's hands. "I don't see that it's any business of yours, or anyone else's for that matter. But if you must know, I consider myself above trivial matters such as courtships and flattery. I prefer to spend my hours improving my mind through an intense study of philosophy and stitching parables into the linings of my gowns. Now, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go find my hummingbird." Adjusting the hat on her head, she marched off toward where the bird had fled, leaving a stricken Duke and oblivious Countess in her wake. "Think I can guess the answer to your question," said Jest, joking, but not unkind. He handed the Duke a gracious smile. "Better luck next time, chap." With a sigh, Lord Varthog tipped his hat to Catherine and led the Countess away, his interest in their conversation waning as soon as Margaret had gone. "I apologize to have interrupted," said Jest, though he spoke quietly and it was difficult to hear him over the sudden galloping of her heart. "You needn't apologize," she said. "I fear I was doing a disservice to the Duke, though I'd meant to help." "'Tis too often the way of good intentions. Is matchmaking a frequent hobby of yours, or is the Duke a rare and lucky beneficiary of your services?" "So far, I'm afraid my services have been neither lucky nor beneficial, but it is in fact my first attempt. The Duke fancies Lady Merle, but isn't adept at showing it, as you may have noticed. And so he and I are trading favors," she shrugged. "It's complicated." "So, you deal in favors. That's good to know." He grinned. She grinned back. "Speaking of favors," he said with some hesitation, "I'd nearly forgotten. I was sent to summon you, Lady Pinkerton." "Summon me?" He clasped his hands behind his back in imitation of one of the royal squires. "His Majesty the King has requested a word with you."